Hi, everybody. I'm John. This is The Record Shelf. And today we are going to begin a new album called Van Halen, which is the debut album of the band Van Halen. Came out in 1978. Was an enormous hit and has so many good songs on it. It was back in 1976, Van Halen was recording demos, and they had a tape recorder that was paid for by Gene Simmons of Kiss, and he was attracted to their sound. And so anyway, Gene Simmons helped them get their, he got them some clothes, flew them out to New York, and gave them a recording session. Now, they didn't get a record deal out of it, but they got exposure. And after recording the demos, the band was offered several concerts. So at a sold-out show in Pasadena, the group, their future manager, Marshall Burrell, he discovered the band. And he and his music entrepreneur, Kim Fowley, paired them with a punk rock band called Venus and the Razorblades, because punk rock was starting to come out at the time. And anyway, for a big gig at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Pasadena. Anyway, well, Ted Templeman, who was a producer at the time, was very impressed by the band's performance at the Starwood, and he proceeded to sign a contract with them with Warner Brothers. And so thus began the first album of Van Halen, Van Halen 1. It's just called Van Halen. And on the cover, it's got all four artists on the cover. And it was a album that kind of took the whole place by storm, because at this point, disco music was pretty much ruling the airwaves. And it was everywhere. And it wasn't even good disco. A lot of it was just very mediocre stuff being pumped out by the labels in order to make a lot of money. And a lot of us who were into progressive rock and rock music, we didn't want to hear any more disco. In fact, there was a big party at White Sox Field, Comiskey Field in Chicago. I'm not sure what year it was, but I know it was in the late 70s. And it was called Disco they burned disco records. Let's put it that way. They had a bonfire, and everybody took disco records and threw it into the fire. And I know some guys, friends of mine, that went to that. And so we were tired of disco at this time. And out comes Van Halen with just incredible sound, just driving hard party rock that we were ready for. And of course, Eddie's guitar sound was unmatched. And in fact, after this album came out, everybody wanted to sound like Eddie Van Halen. Okay, they all went out and made their guitars look like Eddie Van Halen's guitar. They all started learning how to play their version of Eruption. And tapping was introduced by Eddie Van Halen, even though they'd been doing it for decades before that. It was just kind of a novelty. But then Eddie brought it to the mainstream. And as you know, in the 1980s, tapping was everywhere. Everybody was tapping, thanks to Eddie Van Halen. So now, Van Halen didn't have a lot of material. They had some stuff, a few original songs, but they were playing Kinks music. And the reason they played Kinks music is because people could dance to it. And they recognized that. So they kind of give it their own hard rock edge. And anyway, so because they didn't have a lot of material, but they did have some Kinks material, they went with it. And Michael Anthony just said we basically took our live show and put the songs on the album. And the whole album took about 2 weeks to record. And Ted Templeman wanted to make a big, powerful guitar record. And he had all that he needed. And what Eddie was doing was basically Eruption and the stuff he was doing for his music. So they went with it. They recorded this album, and it was a huge splash. And I remember from my own experience as a teenager, we were like, wow, listen to these guys. This is really in something. In fact, some of my best friends came over to visit me one day, and they brought me a cassette tape. I think it was a cassette tape of their first album, and put it in. And we're like, wow, that is really something. Now, I think I did hear their first Dance the Night Away on the radio, and that was a very popular song, Dance the Night Away. But as far as this album goes, it was really, really something special, because we just didn't know who these guys were, and they were so unique, hard, party-driven. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you played for parties, okay? This is party music. And, of course, people have been playing Boston. They've been playing, other bands. And Led Zeppelin, and Van Halen came along. Suddenly, you heard Van Halen coming out of all the cars, cruising town at night. Everybody had Van Halen going on. And we didn't know who they were, but they were good. So those of us that didn't live in Southern California had never heard of these guys. But this album has basically, we're going to start with the first 4 songs. The reason is because we're going to play Eruption, which is basically the second song, but it was always played together with the Kinks song version, You Really Got Me Now, on the radio. And the reason is they couldn't break them apart because they were so close together, they played them all in one. Now, later on when computers took over and corporate radio came along, they separated them separately, and Eruption is rarely played at all, if ever. And so You Really Got Me Now is the only one that's played. But back then, we heard them together as like one song. Like a couple of Boston songs, for example, or other songs where you have the solo or whatever is the instrumental leads into the song. And then you have basically one song with a really big, powerful intro. But it's actually a separate song. So we're going to do 4 songs. We're going to do Runnin' with the Devil, which was a great song to kick off the album with. I mean, it just starts off, bam, and you're off to the races. You think, man, these guys are fire. And then you have the Eruption guitar solo, which Eddie just stunned the world with. And then You Really Got Me Now, which is the Kinks song that they had been playing a long time and they were really good at. So they kept it in there. And then I'm the One, which is Ain't Talkin' Bout Love, which was next. And so that's the order of the songs we're on the album. In fact, I'm going to just double check this. Absolutely. Yes. Side A includes Runnin' with the Devil, Eruption, and then You Really Got Me, and then Ain't Talkin' Bout Love, and I'm the One. That's the first side of the record. So we're going to do the first 4 songs. Running with the Devil, Eruption, You Really Got Me, and Ain't Talkin' Bout Love. And if you haven't heard Van Halen before and you're new to this, this is really some spectacular rock and roll. By the late 1970s, a lot of technology was coming in, and Eddie did a lot of interesting stuff to make his guitar sound the way it did. And but Runnin' with the Devil is just a great song, totally just amazing music. And in fact, it starts with a backwards car horn recorded, which was actually made by something that a contraption that Eddie made, and he put together using a bunch of horns. I think it was a car battery, and he had a switch he could hit with his foot. And so they used, when they played in clubs, they had that sound like pre-recorded. Anyway, so they included it on the demo that Gene Simmons produced for them back in '77 after seeing them in concert. Simmons flew the band out and did the whole thing and got them some gigs, and they got some exposure. And Gene Simmons, ironically, had the idea for the car horns at the beginning, and he had the band do this on the 1977 House of Pain demo, which he produced for them as well. Anyway, this song contains many of the things that Van Halen became famous for. David Lee Roth's squealing vocals, Eddie's guitar solo, Michael Anthony's really great high-level backup vocals, which worked so well with at the harmonies with Eddie singing, and with David Lee Roth's lead vocals. And I don't want to leave out. Let me give you the name of the band members, in case you don't know: Eddie Van Halen, David Lee Roth, Alex Van Halen, and Michael Anthony. These are the guys in the band. And Michael Anthony was the bass player. A tremendous bass player. And this guy pounded the bass. I mean, he created that thundering boom, 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 boom for the band because, Eddie was all over the place on the guitar. They needed a solid rhythmic music part that would work with the drummer, that would carry the melody along when Eddie was doing his guitar licks. And Michael Anthony did a great job of that. He really was able to fill in the gap between the rhythm section and carrying the melody. And plus he had the great vocals to go with it. So these guys were a complete package. And it wasn't until later in the 80s when they lost David Lee Roth and they had to find another singer. And that's the way it went. We'll get to that later in the 80s when the whole new version of Van Halen appears. And they sound a bit different. But excuse me, this is the way bands were a lot. So anyway, this is the David Lee Roth incarnation of Van Halen, the original. And it's a great song, a great driving song. And I can tell you, in 78, I was 17 years old. So this was a big deal when I was 17 years old. Everybody wanted to have Van Halen's first record and play it at their parties and play it in their car. So we're going to start now with Van Halen, Running with the Devil. Let's get it going. Great bass guitar. There's a squeal. You can hear his squealing. Guitar is all on the right hand side, just the bands on the left. Great studio work. Woo! Yeah, that was a ride. Oh, that was good. That was great. That was great. Yeah, folks, there you go. Running with the Devil. First album off their debut album. This was a gut punch when I was 17 years old. Like, man, at last we got some real new rock and roll to listen to. I'm so sick of disco, and oh my gosh, this was like a breath of fresh air. Because, Boston came out in 76, and they came out with another album in 78, 79, but there was this gap, and Van Halen came in and filled that gap so nicely. Oh, my gosh. Now, it's interesting to note that this album, they didn't use a lot of studio tricks. They really did play it for the record the way they played it on stage. So when they could go on stage and recreate it without too much trouble, it would sound exactly the same. And that was a good plan on their part. So this was a great first song off the album. Just it was like they're introducing themselves. We are here to keep rock and roll going. because there was a lot of new stuff coming along in the late 70s. We had punk rock coming along. We had the beginnings of new wave rock and roll with like the Cars and others that were doing a more minimalist kind of rock. More keyboards was starting to get in. More synthesizer was starting to come in. And really just rock and just heavy rock music was actually kind of dying out a little bit in the late 70s. And disco was, driving a stake in its heart as much as it could. But a Disco Demolition, that's the name of the event at Comiskey Park in Chicago. Disco Demolition. And it was our revolt against the just saturation of disco music. And there were some good disco songs. Bee Gees had some good material, and there were others. But there was a lot of copycat stuff that was just trash. As always, it's always the case. When the labels see money, cha-ching, they'll just produce garbage to make as much money as they can. And that's what happened. But thankfully, Van Halen came along, rescued rock and roll in a sense, and they started out with this song, which was just killer. And we knew that, man, rock and roll ain't dead. It's still around. And these guys were unapologetic. I mean, you could hear David Lee Roth squealing in his high-end squeaks and stuff, which nobody else was doing, by the way. And David Lee Roth wasn't really a great singer, but he was perfect for Van Halen. He had exactly something new, something fresh, something powerful, something different. And that's what he had. And he was an incredible stage presence. David Lee Roth knew how to entertain on stage, like Freddie Mercury, but even more athletic. This guy could just really just keep the audience riveted with his antics, jumping and flipping. And the guy was like an Olympics show on the stage. And so that was also something new and different, exciting. One thing I want to add about Eddie Van Halen here. I tell a lot of my students, I said, if you want to be a great at what you're doing, you need to put aside all the stuff that isn't going to help you get there. You need to concentrate on what you're doing, what you want to be good at, and do that. Don't waste your time with things that are not your future. Do that thing. And even in high school, put your time when your friends are going out partying and when they're going out and doing stuff and when this and that and the other thing, you work on what you want to do and you concentrate on it. Yeah, you won't be able to have the fun now, delayed gratification, but you will get it later. When they're all still trying to pick up the parts of their lives and make something work, you're ready to go. You're already ahead of the game and you are going to be the best at what you do. That's what Eddie did. Now, it's interesting. Eddie and Alex being the drummer, and Eddie started the opposite. Alex was the guitar player and Eddie was the drummer. But they decided to flip it. And it's a good thing because Alex was a tremendous drummer. And, of course, Eddie was just a genius guitar player, brilliant, and just one of a kind. He changed the sound of guitar playing permanently. In fact, I would say Eddie Van Halen almost single-handedly created the 80s guitar sound in many ways. Not in everything, but in a lot of ways. Changed it all. Now, there were other great guitar players before Eddie Van Halen. I mean, there was Ted Nugent. Of course, there were Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, and the list goes on and on. Great guitar players. But Eddie did something totally new, and he did it really well. And he did it really well because he spent his youth working on the guitar. When his friends were going out and partying, when they were doing something else, he stayed home and practiced guitar. Yeah, he missed out on stuff when he was a kid, but think of all he gained as a grown-up and in his 20s and 30s and beyond. So I tell my students that if you really want to be a great drummer, put aside the stuff you're doing, concentrate on this. If you really want this to be it for you, put aside the stuff now. Do this now, because later on, when they're all trying to figure out what they're going to do the rest of your life, you're set to go, and you'll be great at your game. Okay, so that was running with the devil, and now we're going to go to the next song, which is Eddie's famous guitar solo, Eruption. Now, we've heard this guitar solo different ways, played in different ways during the history of Van Halen. But this is the original guitar solo, and it leads you into You Really Got Me, which is a cover for the Kinks song on this album. And it started as a warm-up exercise, really. Eddie was just warming up, and this is what he would do. And Ted Templeman thought, man, it'd be a great addition to this album, so why don't you put it in, which they did. And he ran his guitar through a very cheap unit called a Univox to get this growl. He starts out at the beginning, and he put a different motor in the unit to give it a really unique sound, which it really did. No one had ever heard a guitar sound like this before. It just was like completely different. Just like Boston's first album. We never heard guitars like that. Well, Eddie did something similar. He took apart guitars and processing devices to create new effects. So he was creating new effects in his laboratory. And that was part of the reason why he sounded so unique. His guitar playing here was a huge leap forward in the progression of guitar rock. And especially this Eruption. It upped the game for everybody. It was the bar-raising moment. It was kind of like me being a drummer and hearing John Bonham, then hearing Neil Peart. You know, it's like the bar just went up to here, now it went up to here, and now I've got to do better. Everybody wants to be like that guy. And so the technique of finger tapping, like I said, had been around a while, but nobody really used it like this guy did. He created whole songs with it, and he would use classical music sometimes to play on a tapping, and his impact was just enormous. I cannot overstate the impact Eddie Van Halen had on rock music and guitar playing. Within 6 months of the release of this first album, every young guitar player was out there in America and in Europe, and even in Japan, especially in Japan, they were buying guitars, making them look like Eddie's and trying to play Eruption. Okay, it absolutely was a groundbreaking event. So, the next song is Eruption, and you got to hear it. The studio version is great. The live version is awesome too, but it's different. This is the one he practiced with. This is the first Eruption. So let's get to it now and let's see if I get this going here. All right, with Eruption from Van Halen. And here we go, right now. Tapping. Can you see why everybody was excited about this guy? Can you hear it? This was something completely new. We're like, wow, this is amazing. This is mind-blowing. Here we go. Love this. I love this. Great guitar. And
don't ever let me be. I only wanna be by your side. Please don't ever let me be. I only wanna be by your side. Girl, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing, yeah. Oh yeah, you really got me now. Got me so I can see that night. You really got me. You really got me. You really got me.
There's Eddie again, going off the rails. Hear that bass? squealing.
Girl, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. Girl, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night. Girl, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know where I'm going. Yeah. Oh yeah, you really got me now. Got me so I can't sleep at night. You really got me. You really got me. You really got me. Oh, oh,
Yeah, woo, nice, nice. Can you see why we were so excited about this band when they came out? I mean, come on, man. It was like, these guys are high energy. These guys are serious. And not only high energy and they're serious, they play some really good music. They took this song from the 1960s and totally redesigned it for a new generation with new styles, new effects, new technology. And I'm sure people, fans of the old one, were like, oh, what they do to it. But believe me, we appreciated it because we went back and listened to the Kinks record. Oh, yeah, it's a good song. But you know what? Without Eddie's guitar, it wasn't the one we liked. We wanted Eddie's guitar, and this has it in spades. He's got all the stuff in there, the tapping, everything else. He would just go, between phrases, he would do his little guitar thing. It was always in there. It was always in there, which was fresh and new and unlike anyone else before that. And, of course, David Lee Roth's incredible vocalization sound effects were in there all over the place, especially at that bridge part. They did some overlapping with him squealing and singing to get that sort of sexual sound out of it. This is what it really was. Anyway, yeah, so this was a terrific song. And once again, Michael Anthony's bass guitar, man, his bass guitar, that thundering, pounding bass Anthony's. He could carry that melody along, but it was a boom, 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 which just, even though it wasn't a full melody, it carried that thundering, pounding feeling, that driving feeling, because all these Van Halen songs are driving. They're pushing you forward. They're just on a race, and it's just go time. It's go time with Van Halen. There's no moment where you're sitting back, oh, let's just sit and interlude and pensively think about life. None of that, folks. This is party music. This is driving rock and roll. And now you can see why we had it on our cassette decks in our cars driving around town when we were in high school and maybe even our 20s. And you can see why, at parties, this was on the menu for music. Okay. Well, the next song is really Ain't Talkin' About Love. And this song is really about casual sex. That's what it's about. Something David Lee Roth was especially known for. He had roadies give out backstage passes to good-looking women at the concerts and offer them a $100 reward if the roadies sent back one he wound up sleeping with. So this is kind of where they were. He played this at many of their. They played this at many of their early shows before they actually got a record deal. This was one they would play a lot. And they included it on the demo that Gene Simmons produced them back in '77. This song gets at least as much airplay now as it did when it first came out. It took Van Halen a few years to get big after their following, so a lot of their early songs are now classic rock staples because they were never really overplayed a lot when they first came out. Anyway, so this is a terrific song, Ain't Talkin' About Love, one of their best songs. This album is loaded down with great rock songs. I don't think there's any clunkers really on it. It's one of those debut albums that just says, we are here, we're giving you everything we've got, and it's all good. And we can write great songs, we can perform great songs, and you want to listen to us. And that's exactly what happened. So here we go now with the song Ain't Talkin' About Love. And here we go now. Starting out with that great guitar sound from Eddie, and then it builds up with Alex's and Michael Anthony's bass. Some great guitar riffs here, just really well created great guitar riffs. Michael Anthony's voice there in the background, carrying that.
Just like I told you before. Yeah, before. You know you're semi-good looking. And on the streets again. Oh yeah, you think you're really cooking, baby. You better find yourself a friend. My friend, it's something about love. My love is rotten to the core.
Alex playing the bell on that right cymbal.
Just like I told you before.
Here's a guitar. Still playing that bell on that right cymbal. Now they drop it down. Little noodling on the guitar there.
There I stood and looked down. You know I lost a lot of friends there, baby. I got no time to mess around. So if you want it, got to bleed, boy, baby. Yeah, got to bleed, baby. You got to bleed, baby. Got to bleed, baby. Ain't talking about love. The love is running to the core. Ain't talking about love. Just like I told you before. Ain't talking about love. Don't wanna talk about love. Don't need to talk about love. Ain't gonna talk about love.
Beating on that right cymbal bell. Double bass. Ah, wow. Yeah, terrific. Still great all these years later. Just a fantastic ending to this 4 set of songs we're doing. And you simply aren't going to find, stop that. You simply aren't going to find a band anywhere that came brand new on the scene with the power and purpose that Van Halen did. Alex Van Halen's drumming here, if you'll notice, he's working hard back there. Alex is breaking a sweat. He's got, I think he started with double bass, then he went to 3 bass, 4 bass, 5, 6. He kept expanding his drum set to literally almost went halfway around him, if not more so. And later on in the 80s, he added a whole row of rototoms on top of his regular toms, and he had added bass drums underneath it. I don't know if he played them all, but he had them there if he needed them. Here. So he was playing a, working with Michael Anthony, dun, 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 because that was the key to their success. Because Eddie's going off on the guitar. He's doing his thing. And there needs to be music and rhythm behind that. Otherwise, it just stops. So Alex Van Halen and Michael Anthony were a great backup rhythm section that were able to do that. Keep the energy going, keep the melody going, keep the power going, while Eddie was allowed to be Eddie, which, of course, that was a formula for success. And, until later on when they began to have personnel problems and conflicts, and that happens in a lot of bands, unfortunately, these guys were top of their game. And you can see, folks, when I would go to a party or something, Van Halen was always on the music menu. It was always there. No matter which album, it was this one or the next one or the next one or the next one or Women, Children First or whatever it was, Van Halen was always somewhere on the party song menu. And you can see why. It was just high energy. It was really refreshing. They weren't trying to be progressive. They weren't trying to come up with new art forms or, talk about deep subjects or, they didn't do that. They were a have fun Southern California party heavy rock band. And they weren't they weren't metal. They were just hard rock. That was enough. And that was the genre they were in. And there's one thing about a lot of rock in the 70s, even if it wasn't progressive, it was always feel-good music. The hard rock in the 70s was always feel-good music. And you listen to Boston, you listen to these guys, you always felt good. It was up energy. It lifted you up. And, this is what you'd hear booming from cars on Friday and Saturday nights in any town in America. Well, that's all we have for this one. I hope you've enjoyed this Magic Carpet Ride to the greatest albums of the 70s and 80s. And we're in the 70s right now. And we're doing the album Van Halen, the debut album of Van Halen. And we've got more to come. There's a lot of good stuff on this album. So I hope you'll stay with me. And if you have any comments, please leave them below. Please like and subscribe if you like what we're doing here. We've got a lot of other reviews I've done on other albums. And this is just the latest. This actually won a poll. We had a poll, and this album tied with Bad Company's album Bad Company. So we're going to be doing that as well. So go watch that if it's out yet. Excuse me. Still getting over my cold. I'm getting close. But anyway, so this is an album we had to get to. It was a revolutionary album, revolutionary sound, one of the top albums of the 1970s, and for very good reason. Well, thanks again. I'm John. This is my record shelf. I hope you will join us again next time. Rock on.